You are not a member of our association. You are a debtor. The blonde woman in a gray suit stood on my cabin porch, holding a thick envelope. 30 days ago, I signed the papers to buy this cabin. 10 years of saving, a lifetime dream. And now, a woman I had never met was demanding $38,000 in HOA fees accumulated by the previous owner, 60 days to pay. If not, foreclosure. She stood there, confident that I would panic and write a check. What she did not know was that in Denver, I work as a data analyst. I find patterns in chaos. I detect fraud in spreadsheets. And when I looked at that demand letter, I saw something that did not add up. If you are watching from your own HOA nightmare, comment where you are watching from, because this woman just picked the wrong person to bully. The boxes were still stacked in the living room when I heard the car pull up. I had been unpacking for 3 days, savoring every moment. 10 years of saving for this. A cabin in the mountains where I could escape Denver, work remotely, and finally breathe. The previous owner, Harold Jennings, had built it himself and lived here until he passed away last spring. His estate sold it to me for a price I could barely afford, and I had signed the papers 30 days ago, thinking my life was finally beginning. Now a black SUV was pulling into my driveway, and something about the way it moved told me this was not a friendly visit. The woman who stepped out did not belong on a dirt road in the mountains. Gray suit, pearl earrings, blonde hair pulled back tight. She walked toward my porch with the confidence of someone who owned everything she could see. I met her at the door, still holding a roll of packing tape. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Mr. Foster, I am Julie Rogers, president of the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association. Welcome to the community." She extended her hand. I shook it, confused. No one had mentioned any HOA. Not the real estate agent, not the title company, not Harold Jennings's estate attorney. I was not aware there was an HOA here, I said. Her smile tightened. "Well, that is actually why I am here." She handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a document titled Notice of Outstanding Assessment. Final Demand. $38,000. 9 years of unpaid dues. Late fees. Interest. A special assessment. And at the bottom, in bold red letters, payment due within 60 days. Failure to remit will result in lien filing. Continued non-payment will result in foreclosure proceedings. I read it twice. "This has to be a mistake," I said. "I just bought this cabin. The title search showed nothing. My deed does not mention any covenants." Julie tilted her head, her expression shifting to something that looked almost like pity. "Mr. Foster, I understand this is a lot to process. The previous owner was non-compliant for many years, but HOA obligations run with the land. When you purchased the property, you inherited his debt." I asked her to explain how my cabin could be part of an HOA that was not on my title. She pulled a folded document from her briefcase. In 2015, our board passed a boundary amendment that incorporated all legacy parcels within the natural boundaries of Pinecrest Ridge. Your property, Legacy Parcel 7, is included. I scanned the document. HOA letterhead. 12 signatures. Legal language. One thing stood out. Was this recorded with the county? Julie paused. Not a brief hesitation. A deliberate pause. The kind someone makes when they are choosing their words carefully. It was properly executed according to our bylaws. She said it slowly, clearly, as if explaining something to a child. That was not an answer. She knew it. And now I knew she knew it. "I will need to review this with an attorney," I said. She nodded, still smiling. "Of course. But I should mention that we have been through this before. Other legacy owners initially resisted. They all came into compliance eventually. It is much easier to simply pay than to fight a battle you cannot win." After she left, I stood on the porch, holding the envelope, staring at mountains that had seemed peaceful an hour ago. $38,000. I did not have. A foreclosure threat on a cabin I had owned for 30 days, and an HOA president who had answered every question except the one that mattered. I went inside and called the title company. The agent who handled my closing picked up on the third ring. I explained the situation and asked her to check the records again. She put me on hold for 15 minutes. When she came back, her voice was confused. "Mr. Foster, I am looking at the county records right now. There is no HOA recorded against your property. No covenants, no liens, no amendments. As far as the county is concerned, your title is clean." I asked her to send me certified copies. She said she would have them by the end of the day. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table. The confusion was starting to shift into something else. Julie Rogers had handed me a demand for $38,000 based on a boundary amendment that was never recorded with the county. She had been the HOA president for over a decade. She knew how property records worked. When I asked about recording, she paused. She chose her words. She deflected. That was not ignorance. That was a strategy. She was counting on me not to verify. She was counting on fear to do her work for her. I pulled out a notepad and started writing down everything I had observed. Her exact words, her pauses, the document she showed me, the questions she avoided. This was what I did for a living. I found patterns in data. I identified anomalies. And right now, every instinct I had was telling me something was very wrong. That evening, I started going through the closets, looking for anything the estate might have left behind. In the back of the master bedroom closet, behind a stack of old blankets, I found a cardboard box, written on the side in black marker. In handwriting I assumed was Harold's, were two words, HOA bullshit. I pulled it out and carried it to the kitchen table. Inside were dozens of envelopes, all from Pinecrest Estates, HOA, dating back to 2015. Demand letters, threatening letters, final notices, and mixed among them, copies of responses Harold had sent, letters citing his deed, letters referencing the original plat map, letters explaining, over and over, that his cabin predated the HOA by 33 years and was never part of their jurisdiction. He had fought them for 9 years. He had never paid a cent, and he had kept everything. At the bottom of the box was a manila folder with a sticky note attached. The note said, "Proof they are lying. Use this when they come for the next owner." I opened the folder. Inside was a copy of the original plat map from 1995, when Pinecrest Estates was first developed. The subdivision was clearly marked lots 1 through 95, and in the corner, outside the boundary lines, was a small notation, Legacy Parcel 7, not part of subdivision, pre-existing structure. Harold Jennings had known the truth. He had documented it, and he had left it for whoever came after him, knowing they would face the same fight. I looked at the folder, then at the demand letter still sitting on my table, then at the mountains through the window. Julie Rogers thought I would panic and pay. She thought I would be too scared or too ignorant to check. She had spent years doing this to people, and it had always worked. But Harold had prepared for this moment. He had given me weapons, and I was going to use them. I spent 2 days reading everything in Harold's box. The pattern was simple. Every year since 2015, the HOA sent a demand, every year. Harold responded with the same facts his deed predated the HOA by 33 years. The boundary amendment was never recorded, and they had no legal authority over his property. The HOA never addressed his arguments. They just sent another notice the following year with more fees added. 9 years of threats that never materialized into action, because Harold called their bluff, and they had nothing behind it. But one exchange told me everything I needed to know about Julie Rogers. In 2018, Harold had written directly to her. "Your so-called boundary amendment was never recorded with the county, under Colorado revised statutes, An unrecorded amendment has no legal effect on properties outside the original subdivision. You know this. I know this. Stop sending me notices. Julie's response was 3 sentences. Mr. Jennings, the amendment was properly executed according to our bylaws. Your continued refusal to pay constitutes a violation of community standards. We will pursue all available remedies. She never denied that the amendment was unrecorded. She never explained how an unrecorded document could bind his property. She just repeated the same deflection she had used with me. This was not confusion. This was a script. She had been running it for years, betting that most people would pay rather than investigate. Harold had not paid. And now I was not going to either. I emailed Julie requesting copies of the boundary amendment and all recorded CC&Rs. Her response invited me to attend the monthly board meeting to address all concerns in a transparent forum. It was not an answer. It was a stage invitation. She wanted me in front of an audience. I replied that I would attend. The Pinecrest Estates clubhouse was larger than I expected. Stone facade, floor-to-ceiling windows, parking lot full of expensive SUVs. About 40 residents sat in rows of folding chairs facing a long table where 5 board members occupied their seats. Julie Rogers was in the center, flanked by board members and an attorney in a suit. A projector screen behind them displayed the HOA logo and the words, "Building Community Together." She smiled when I entered. "Mr. Foster, welcome. Please, take a seat. We are so glad you could join us." Her voice carried across the room, warm and practiced, the voice of someone who had welcomed many newcomers before, turning them into examples. Several heads turned. I found a chair near the back. The meeting began with routine business. Budget updates, maintenance reports, speed bumps. Julie handled each item with the ease of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Board members nodded along. Residents asked softball questions. Everything ran like clockwork. Then Julie shifted her tone. "Before we conclude, I want to address a matter that affects all of us. Mr. Daniel Foster recently purchased the Jennings property on Legacy Parcel 7. Unfortunately, he has inherited a significant outstanding balance, nearly $40,000 in unpaid assessments." She paused, letting the number hang in the air. "He has expressed some concerns about our jurisdiction," she said. Concerns, the way someone might say, delusions. A few residents chuckled. Others shook their heads in disapproval. I raised my hand. Julie's smile flickered. "Mr. Foster, this is not typically a time for questions, but since you are new, I will make an exception." I stood. "Mrs. Rogers, you mentioned a boundary amendment from 2015. I have reviewed county records. There is no such amendment recorded. Was it recorded with the county, yes or no?" The room went quiet. Victor Reyes, the treasurer, shifted in his seat. He looked at Julie, then at the table, then at his hands. The attorney, Robert Marsh, leaned forward. "Colorado law allows HOAs to amend boundaries through proper procedure. The amendment was executed in full compliance with our governing documents." I did not move. "That is not what I asked." Marsh glanced at Julie. "Recording is a ministerial formality. The amendment is binding regardless." The silence stretched. Julie's smile remained fixed, but her eyes had gone cold. I nodded once and sat down. I had made my point. Everyone in that room had watched them avoid a direct answer. Whether they understood what that meant was another question. Julie moved quickly to regain momentum. "Victor, perhaps you could share the financial impact of non-compliance." Victor stood, looking uncomfortable, and fumbled with a laptop before a slide appeared on the projector. $127,000 in outstanding legacy parcel assessments. This represents fees owed by property owners who have refused to contribute to shared services, he said. His voice wavered slightly, and he avoided looking in my direction. Road maintenance, snow removal, common area upkeep. He sat down quickly, as if relieved to be finished. Julie nodded gravely. Non-compliance is not victimless. When someone refuses to pay their fair share, everyone else suffers. We have a fiduciary duty to this community. She looked directly at me, including liens and foreclosure. Several residents turned to glare. I was no longer a neighbor. I was a threat to their property values and their peaceful mountain community. After the meeting, I walked to the parking lot. Julie had turned a legal question into a loyalty test, and I had failed it publicly. She had done this before. The performance was too smooth, the crowd response too practiced. I was unlocking my truck when an older man approached, 70s, gray-haired, flannel shirt, work boots. He checked to make sure no one was watching. "You are asking the right questions, Mr. Foster. My name is Earl Taylor, Legacy Parcel 4. He kept his voice low. "I paid them. 4 years ago. $14,000 because I was scared. My wife was sick. Cancer. I could not handle lawyers in courtrooms while she was dying." He paused, his jaw tightening. "After she passed, I started looking into it. They had no right to that money. None. But by then, it was gone. And I did not have the strength to fight." I asked why he had not tried to get it back. He shook his head. "Because I was alone. Julie has lawyers. Everyone here believes her. And I am just an old man with a cabin." He met my eyes. Harold knew the truth. He fought them for 9 years by himself. "Julie knows you are dangerous now. Be careful." He walked away before I could respond. I sat in my truck, watching the clubhouse lights go out. Julie had the board, the attorney, and the residents. She had spent years collecting money from people who did not know they could refuse. Harold fought alone and died before winning. Earl paid because he was scared and grieving. The question was not whether this was wrong. The question was how far it went and who else was involved. Victor Reyes had looked nervous tonight. Not just uncomfortable. Nervous. Like a man carrying a secret he was afraid might come out. I made a mental note to find out more about him. I started the engine. Tomorrow, I would dig into county records, property transfers, HOA financials, and anything that might show what Pinecrest Estates had really been doing for the past 9 years. Julie thought she had put me in my place tonight. She had no idea she had just given me a target. The county recorder's office in Ridgewood opened at 8 in the morning. I arrived with a list of document requests, the complete chain of title for all 8 legacy parcels Harold had mentioned, any recorded liens, and any documents referencing Pinecrest Estates HOA. The clerk raised an eyebrow at the scope, but disappeared into the archives without comment. 45 minutes later, she returned with a stack of files 6 inches thick. I spread them across a table in the public records room and started building a timeline. This was what I did for a living. Patterns in data, anomalies in numbers. The difference was that usually I was looking at quarterly sales figures, not land records that might explain why someone wanted to take my home. Not a single legacy parcel had any HOA covenant recorded against it. No liens from Pinecrest Estates appeared in official records. The boundary amendment did not exist as far as the county was concerned, but the real pattern was in the ownership transfers. Parcel 1 sold in 2016 to Ridgeline Development LLC. Parcel 2 foreclosed in 2019, purchased at auction by Ridgeline Development LLC. Parcel 5 sold in 2020 to Ridgeline Development LLC. Parcel 6 sold in 2018 to Ridgeline Development LLC. 4 of the 8 legacy parcels now belong to the same company. I sat back in my chair, staring at the documents spread across the table. This was not about HOA fees. This was land acquisition disguised as community enforcement. I searched public business records that afternoon from a coffee shop in town with reliable Wi-Fi. Ridgeline Development LLC was registered with a Denver law firm as its agent, but the company's community liaison was Richard Whitmore, Julie Rogers' husband. I kept digging. Victor Reyes's construction company, Reyes Building Solutions, had $2.3 million in pending contracts with Ridgeline for future development projects. A newspaper article from last year mentioned that Ridgeline was planning a major resort expansion in the Pinecrest Ridge area, pending land acquisition. The connections were not hidden. They did not need to be. No one had ever looked. Harold had suspected. He had kept notes about Ridgeline in his box, but he had never assembled the full picture. He had been fighting alone, without the resources or the time to trace every thread. I had both. The retaliation started within days of the board meeting. My mail arrived late, sometimes opened and resealed with clear tape that did not match the original packaging. The Pinecrest newsletter appeared in my mailbox with an article about property owners who refused to contribute that did not name me but made the target obvious. The hardware store owner in town told me he had heard things and hoped our business would not get complicated. These were annoyances, designed to make me feel watched and unwelcome. The internet was different. My remote work depended on a satellite connection. I had chosen this cabin partly because the previous owner had installed a reliable system that could handle video calls and large file transfers. Suddenly, I was experiencing outages that lasted hours, always during business calls, always at critical moments. A presentation to a client was cut off mid-sentence. A deadline was nearly missed because I could not upload files. The provider claimed technical difficulties, but could not explain why only my address was affected. When I called to escalate, I was placed on hold for 40 minutes before the line disconnected. I tried 3 more times over the following week. Each call ended the same way. I switched to a mobile hotspot and filed a complaint I knew would go nowhere. The message was clear. Someone was making my daily life difficult in ways that were hard to prove and exhausting to fight. This was how Julie operated. Not with dramatic confrontations, but with slow, grinding pressure that wore people down until they surrendered. I met Earl Taylor at his cabin the following week. It was smaller than mine, tucked into a hollow on the other side of the ridge. But the views were just as beautiful. He poured coffee and listened while I explained the Ridgeline connection, the pattern of acquisitions, and the business relationships linking Julie's husband and Victor to the development company. He nodded slowly, his weathered hands wrapped around his mug. I wondered why they were so aggressive. It never made sense that they would spend this much energy on a few $1,000s a year from old cabins, but if they are clearing land for a resort... He stared out the window at the mountains. Betty Morrison lived in her cabin for 30 years. She was 72 when they took it, could not afford a lawyer, could not handle the stress, moved to her daughter's place in Arizona. He paused. Died 6 months later. Heart attack. Her daughter told me she never recovered from losing her home. I asked if he would go on record with what he knew. He hesitated, setting down his coffee. I paid them. Daniel. $14,000 because I was too scared to fight. My wife was dying. I could not add a legal battle to everything else we were going through. If I come forward now, I have to admit that. I have to admit I was a coward. I told him he was not a coward. He was a man who decided under impossible pressure while caring for someone he loved. That was not cowardice. That was survival. Earl stared at his coffee for a long moment. Let me think about it. Julie has a way of making life very hard for people who cross her. I need to decide if I am ready for that fight. The certified letter was waiting in my mailbox when I got home. Notice of Leanne, $38,000. Pinecrest Estates, HOA versus Foster property. Attached to the back was a note on Julie Rogers' personal stationery, handwritten in elegant script. Mr. Foster, this is your final courtesy notice. Pay within 30 days, or we proceed with foreclosure. I have done this before. I will do it again. She was not being careless. She was being confident. She had sent notes like this to Harold for 9 years, to Earl, to Betty Morrison, to everyone who had stood in her way. None of them had ever used it against her. She had no reason to believe I would be different. I photographed the note and filed it with the rest of my evidence. 30 days until foreclosure proceedings. A woman who had spent a decade perfecting this operation believed she could break me the same way she had broken the others. I opened my laptop and started drafting an email to a real estate attorney in Denver whose name I had found in Harold's files. Joan Stewart. She specialized in HOA disputes and had a reputation for not backing down. Tomorrow I will call her. Tonight. I would organize everything I had found into a timeline she could use. Julie Rogers thought this fight was over. She had no idea it was just beginning. Joan Stewart's office was on the 14th floor of a glass tower in downtown Denver. The waiting room had leather chairs and framed articles about her biggest victories. She was younger than I expected, mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a handshake that meant business. I had sent her everything the night before Harold's documents, my county records research, the Ridgeline connections, and the lien with Julie's handwritten note. She had read all of it. "You have a strong case," she said, spreading the documents across her conference table. "The lien is invalid. They have no jurisdiction. The boundary amendment was never recorded. And even if it had been, Colorado law requires consent from affected property owners. They did not get that consent." I asked what the next step was. She leaned back. "We file a motion to quiet title and invalidate the lien. We can get a temporary restraining order to stop foreclosure while the case is pending, but this will take time, 6 months minimum, possibly a year, and it will cost money. My retainer is $10,000. Depending on how hard they fight, the total could be 3 or 4 times that." I told her I did not have $40,000. She nodded without surprise. "Most people do not. That is what Julie Rogers is counting on. Even if her claims are legally worthless, the cost of fighting is enough to break most people. That is why she keeps doing it. The economics work in her favor until someone is willing to absorb the cost of proving her wrong." Joan studied the Ridgeline connection, tracing the lines I had drawn between the development company, Victor Reyes, and Julie's husband. "What makes your case different is this. If we can prove systematic fraud, not just aggressive enforcement, we might get the district attorney involved. Criminal charges change everything. They also open up recovering attorney fees and damages." She looked at me. "But to prove fraud, I need internal documents, meeting minutes, communications between Julie, Victor, and Ridgeline. Something that shows they knew what they were doing was illegal." I mentioned Harold's 2018 letter explicitly telling Julie the amendment was unrecorded. She made a note. "Helpful, but I need more. I am filing a FOIA request for all board meeting minutes since 2015. Public organizations in Colorado are required to maintain and provide these records. Let us see what they were saying when they thought no one was paying attention." The first attack came 3 days later. An email went out to all 95 households with the subject line, "Protecting our community from legal threats." And Julie explained that a new property owner was refusing to pay his fair share and had retained attorneys to file frivolous lawsuits against our HOA. The email claimed this would set a dangerous precedent and force remaining homeowners to cover the shortfall through increased dues. It urged residents to stand together against this attack on our community values. By evening, the community message board was filled with comments calling me a freeloader and a lawsuit abuser. Someone posted my business email address and suggested concerned residents let me know how they felt. My inbox is filled with messages ranging from angry to threatening. One said simply, "People like you do not belong here. Leave before it gets worse." The professional attack was more surgical. My manager called me into a video meeting the following week. Her tone was careful, the kind of careful that meant something was wrong. "Daniel, I received a call yesterday from someone claiming to represent a homeowners association in Colorado. She said you were using company time and resources to pursue a personal vendetta against a non-profit community organization." I explained the situation as calmly as I could. The invalid lien, the fraudulent fees, The pattern of land acquisition. My manager listened without interrupting. "I believe you," she said finally. "But this is documented now. HR has a record of the complaint. If anything else comes up, they will have to investigate formally." Julie had not tried to get me fired. She had done something more effective. She had created a paper trail that would follow me through every performance review, every promotion discussion. Every moment when my judgment might be questioned, the seed was planted. All she had to do was wait for it to grow. The local isolation followed a predictable pattern. No trespassing signs appeared on county roads near my cabin, placed by someone with no authority to restrict public access. The hardware store owner became distant, finding reasons to end conversations quickly. My mail arrived, opened, and resealed with tape that did not match the original. These were annoyances designed to remind me I was being watched. The restaurant was different. The Ridgewood Grill was the only place to eat within 20 miles. I had been there twice since moving in, and the owner had been friendly enough. When I walked in on a Thursday evening, the hostess looked past me and said they were fully booked. I could see 4 empty tables through the window behind her. I asked if I could wait for one to open up. She said the wait would be at least 2 hours. A couple walked in behind me and was seated immediately. I left without arguing. The message was clear. The propane company was worse. My cabin's heating system depended on regular deliveries, and with winter approaching, I could not afford delays. The first cancellation was blamed on a scheduling error. The second was blamed on a truck breakdown. The third time I called, the dispatcher said they had no record of my account. I found another company an hour away and paid a premium for emergency delivery. By then, I was driving to the next town for groceries, gas, and everything else. The cabin that was supposed to be my sanctuary had become a place I had to defend just to survive. I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains orange and red, and considered walking away. Sell the cabin, take the loss, go back to Denver, rebuild, forget. The thought was seductive. No more legal fees, no more harassment, no more wondering what Julie would do next. But then I thought about Harold Jennings, who had spent 9 years alone, documenting everything, refusing to surrender. He had left me his weapons because he knew someone else would need them. If I walked away, his fight died with me. Earl called that night. His voice was tight, barely controlled. "Julie sent me another letter. $8,000 for a road improvement assessment. She knows I already paid $14,000. She knows I do not have this kind of money." He took a breath. "She is trying to break both of us. Daniel." I told him to hold on. Joan was working on something. Do not pay a cent until he hears from me. Joan called the next morning. "I got the board meeting minutes from 2015. The FOIA request came through faster than expected." Her voice was controlled, but I heard something underneath it. "Daniel, there were only 12 people at that meeting, all board members or their spouses. The vote to incorporate legacy parcels was unanimous." She paused. "No legacy parcel owners were notified. No consent was obtained. No public hearing was held. They just decided, among themselves, to claim authority over properties they had no right to touch." I asked what that meant legally. "It means this is not overreach. This is fraud. Intentional. Documented fraud. And Julie Rogers' signature is on every page." The morning after Joan's call, I made a decision. No more public confrontations. No more questions at board meetings. No more responses to accusations on community message boards. Julie Rogers expected me to fight the way Harold had fought, openly and alone, giving her endless opportunities to paint me as the aggressor. I was not going to give her that. Instead, I was going to disappear. And while she thought I was broken, I was going to build the case that would end her. Joan and I developed a strategy. She would handle the legal filings and official requests. I would use my data analysis skills to map the full scope of the operation. We divided the work into 4 tracks. Track 1, official records. Joan had the 2015 board minutes, but we needed everything. Every meeting since the boundary amendment was passed. Every financial report. Every communication that might show what the board knew and when they knew it. She filed additional FOIA requests and subpoenas for documents the HOA was required to maintain. Track 2 pattern documentation. I built a comprehensive spreadsheet tracking every legacy parcel, every demand letter sent, every payment made, every sale or foreclosure, and every connection to Ridgeline development. The pattern was clear, but I needed it organized in a way that would be undeniable in court. Track 3 financial connections. Public records showed Victor Reyes's contracts with Ridgeline, but I dug deeper, searching business filings, property transfers, and campaign contributions. I found that Julie had purchased a vacation home in Aspen in 2021, 3 years after the first legacy parcel was sold to Ridgeline. The price was $450,000. Her disclosed income as a real estate agent did not come close to explaining it. Track 4, the victim network. I needed people who would tell their stories. I started with Betty Morrison. Joan tracked her down through her daughter in Arizona. Betty was 74 now, living in a small apartment, still grieving the home she had lost 5 years ago. She agreed to a phone call. Her voice was tired but clear. They told me I owed $12,000. I did not have $12,000. I did not have a lawyer. I did not have anyone to help me. Julie Rogers came to my house and told me that if I just signed the papers, it would all be over. She said Ridgeline would give me fair market value for my cabin. I believed her. Betty paused. They gave me $60,000. My cabin was worth at least $120. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late. I had signed everything away. I asked if she would be willing to provide a written statement. She said yes. I have nothing left to lose, and maybe it will help someone else. Tom Wheeler, who had sold Parcel 5 in 2020, told a similar story. Years of demand letters, escalating fees, threats of foreclosure. A visit from Julie offering to help him find a buyer who would take the property as is and clear his debt. The buyer was Ridgeline. Tom received $75,000 for a property worth twice that. I knew something was wrong, he said, but I was tired. My wife was scared. We just wanted it to be over. He agreed to provide a statement as well. Earl Taylor was the hardest. He had paid $14,000 and received nothing in return except the privilege of keeping a home he had already owned free and clear. Going on record meant admitting he had been deceived, that his fear had cost him money he could not afford to lose. I drove to his cabin on a Saturday afternoon and sat with him on his porch, looking at the same mountains I could see from mine. I am not asking you to be brave, I said. I am asking you to tell the truth, one time, on paper, and then let Joan and me handle the rest. Earl stared at the ridgeline for a long time. Harold fought alone for 9 years, he said finally. I watched him do it. I should have helped him. I should have stood with him instead of paying them off and hoping they would leave me alone. He turned to face me. I will do it. I will give you a statement. But you have to promise me something. Promise me you will finish this. The breakthrough came from Harold's box. I had been through every document multiple times, but I had missed something. Tucked into a side pocket of the cardboard, beneath a stack of old receipts, was a USB drive. The label, written in Harold's handwriting, said, "Meeting recording, do not lose." I plugged it into my laptop that evening with no idea what to expect. The file was an audio recording, slightly muffled but clearly audible. The date stamp said March 15th, 2015. The voices were unmistakable. Julie Rogers, Victor Reyes, Robert Marsh, and 10 other board members. Discussing the boundary amendment. The recording was 43 minutes long. Most of it was procedural, motions, and votes, and legal language. But 3 exchanges changed everything. The first came at minute 12. A board member asked how the legacy parcel owners would be notified of the amendment. Julie's response was immediate. They will not be notified. If we tell them what we are doing, they will object. We proceed quietly. By the time they realize what has happened, they will be too deep in fees and interest to fight back. The second exchange came at minute 27. Victor Reyes asked, "Is this legal? Can we just add properties without the owner's consent?" Robert Marsh answered, "The amendment is structured to comply with our internal bylaws. Whether it complies with state law is a question we hope never gets tested." Julie added, "It will not get tested. These are old people in old cabins. They do not have lawyers. They do not have resources. They will pay, or they will leave. Either way, we win." The third exchange came at minute 38. A board member mentioned Ridgeline Development by name. "Richard says they are ready to move as soon as we clear the parcels. The resort expansion is contingent on acquiring those properties." Julie's voice was calm. "Then we need to accelerate the timeline. Start with the Morrison property. She is the most vulnerable." I sat in my kitchen, staring at the laptop screen, listening to the recording again. Harold had known. Somehow, he had obtained this recording, probably through a sympathetic board member, and he had kept it hidden for 9 years. He had known what Julie was doing, and he had prepared the evidence that would destroy her. He had not lived long enough to use it. I called Joan immediately. She listened to the recording 3 times without speaking. When she finally responded, her voice was tight. "Daniel, this is not just fraud. This is a conspiracy. Conspiracy to deprive property rights. Potentially racketeering given the pattern of conduct. I am contacting the district attorney's office tomorrow." She paused. "And I know a journalist. Walter Castillo at Colorado Mountain News. He has been investigating rural land grabs for months. This is exactly the kind of story he is looking for. If we are going to expose Julie Rogers, we need to do it in daylight. Full public accountability. Are you ready for that?" I looked out the window at the mountains, now dark against the evening sky. Harold had fought alone for 9 years, waiting for this moment. Betty Morrison had lost her home. Earl Taylor had lost his money. Tom Wheeler had lost his peace. Julie Rogers had built an empire on their suffering, confident that no one would ever hold her accountable. She was wrong. I told Joan I was ready, whatever it took. Walter Castillo was not what I expected. The man who met me at a diner in Ridgewood was in his early 40s, clean-shaven, dressed in flannel and hiking boots. He looked more like a ski instructor than a journalist, but when he started talking, the intelligence behind his eyes was unmistakable. "I have been investigating rural land grabs in Colorado for 6 months," he said, spreading a map across the table. Red dots marked locations across the western half of the state. Developers using HOAs as acquisition tools, fraudulent liens, pressure campaigns against elderly homeowners. The pattern is everywhere. But until now, I could not find anyone willing to go on record with documentation. He tapped one of the red dots. "Pinecrest Ridge. Joan Stewart says you have evidence, not suspicions, not theories, actual documented evidence that can hold up in print." I told him everything. The boundary amendment was never recorded. The pattern of acquisitions, the financial connections between Julie, Victor, and Ridgeline, the victim statements from Betty Morrison, Tom Wheeler, and Earl Taylor. Walter took notes, asking precise questions about dates, document sources, and the chain of custody. Then I played him the recording. He listened with his eyes closed, his pen motionless. Julie said the legacy owners would not be notified. Robert Marsh admitted the amendment might not comply with state law, the mention of Ridgeline and the resort expansion. When it ended, Walter opened his eyes and set down his pen. "How did Harold Jennings get this recording?" I told him I did not know. Probably a sympathetic board member. Walter nodded. It does not matter for my purposes. What matters is that it exists. It is authentic, and it corroborates everything else you have shown me." He gathered his notes. "This is exactly what I needed. My editor will approve this by the end of the week. We run on Saturday morning." The cracks started appearing within days. The district attorney's office sent a formal inquiry letter to the Pinecrest Estates Board, requesting all documents related to the boundary amendment, the legacy parcel assessments, and any communications with Ridgeline Development. The letter cited potential violations of Colorado property law and referenced ongoing investigations into similar schemes in other counties. It was addressed to Julie but copied to every board member individually. Victor Reyes called an emergency meeting that night. Earl told me what happened. Victor arrived with printouts of the inquiry letter, his hands shaking. He wanted to hire a criminal defense attorney immediately. He wanted the board to issue a statement cooperating fully with the investigation before anyone started cutting deals. Julie told him to calm down. She said they had been through scrutiny before. She said the legal structure was sound. Victor asked her directly, "Did you talk to a lawyer before we passed that amendment in 2015? A real lawyer, not Robert?" Julie did not answer. She told him to keep his mouth shut and let her handle it. Victor left the meeting early. 2 board members resigned the following week, citing personal reasons and time constraints. Neither responded to requests for comment from other board members. A third, Patricia Hendricks, who had served on the board for 8 years, requested a private session to discuss what she called governance concerns, according to Earl's sources. She asked pointed questions. Had the legacy parcel owners ever been formally notified of the amendment? Had the board obtained an independent legal opinion before proceeding? Why had the amendment never been recorded with the county? Julie dismissed each question as second-guessing decisions that were made years ago by people who were no longer on the board. Patricia did not resign, but she stopped attending meetings and responding to emails from Julie. The inner circle was shrinking. Joan filed a formal complaint with the county recorder's office, alleging that Pinecrest Estates HOA had filed fraudulent instruments against multiple properties outside its legal jurisdiction. The complaint included certified copies of the original plat map showing the legacy parcels excluded, the unrecorded boundary amendment, and lien notices sent to owners of properties the HOA had no authority. The county recorder opened an investigation within 48 hours. Flags were placed on the titles of all properties with active Pinecrest liens. Anyone attempting to buy, sell, or refinance those properties would now see a county warning that the liens were under investigation for potential fraud. Real estate agents in the area started calling Joan's office, asking what was happening. Julie responded with precision. An emergency board meeting was called for Tuesday. The agenda was distributed to all members 24 hours in advance, as required by the bylaws. 3 items. First, authorize retention of a collection agency for all outstanding legacy parcel debts. Second, accelerate foreclosure proceedings against the Foster property specifically. Third, approve a special assessment of $200 per household to fund legal defense. The motions passed with the votes of the remaining loyal board members. Julie then announced a community meeting for the following Saturday, open to all Pinecrest residents, to address what she called coordinated attacks by outside parties seeking to undermine our community. The email to residents was carefully worded. It framed me as part of a broader campaign to destroy the HOA and devalue their homes. It urged attendants to demonstrate solidarity. It made no mention of the DA inquiry, the county investigation, or the board resignations. She was not panicking. She was consolidating what remained of her support before anyone could ask questions she did not want to answer. Walter called on Thursday. My editor approved the story. We run Saturday morning, at 7 a.m., 2 hours before the community meeting starts. His voice was calm but focused. I have on-record interviews with Betty Morrison, Tom Wheeler, and Earl Taylor. I have 3 additional sources who confirmed the pattern but asked for anonymity. I have the recording, transcribed and verified. I have the county investigation on record. I have the financial connections documented through public filings." He paused. "Julie Rogers is going to walk into that meeting with no idea what just went live. By the time she reaches the podium, half the room will have read the article on their phones." I spent the days before the meeting organizing my evidence into a presentation. The original plat map showing Legacy Parcel 7 excluded from the subdivision. The county records confirm that no HOA documents were ever recorded against my property. The 2015 board minutes show that no legacy owners were notified or present. The recording with Julie's own voice explaining the strategy. The pattern of acquisitions shows 4 of 8 legacy parcels now owned by Ridgeline. The financial connections, the victim statements, the threatening notes, the timeline. Every piece documented, every connection verified, every claim sourced. Earl called Friday night. His voice was steady. "I talked to Walter today, gave him my full statement, everything, including how much I paid and why." He paused. "Harold always said the truth would come out eventually. He just did not live long enough to see it." Saturday morning. I drove past the clubhouse on my way to get coffee. The parking lot was already filling. Julie's SUV was parked in its usual spot near the entrance. Through the windows. Volunteers were setting up extra chairs. Walter's article had gone live at 7. The district attorney's office had sent an investigator to observe and take notes. Julie did not know any of this yet. I parked on the ridge overlooking the clubhouse and watched the cars arrive. In 2 hours, I would walk into that room. In 2 hours, she would face the evidence she had spent a decade burying. I started the engine and drove toward the clubhouse. The parking lot was full when I arrived. Cars lined the road for a quarter mile in both directions. I had never seen this many people at a Pinecrest event. Walter's article had done its work. By 8 in the morning, it had been shared over 2,000 times. By 9, local news stations were calling his editor asking for comment. By 9:30, when I walked through the clubhouse doors, I could see phones glowing in every hand, people reading and rereading the headline, "Mountain HOA accused of systematic fraud in developer land grab scheme." The main room had been set up for a crowd of 60. Over 90 people had come. Extra chairs lined the walls. People stood in the back. The atmosphere was tense in a way I had never felt before. A mixture of confusion, anger, and fear. Some residents looked at me with hostility. Others looked at me with something closer to curiosity. A few nodded as I passed. They had read the article. They were waiting to see what would happen next. Julie stood at the front of the room, flanked by Robert Marsh and 2 remaining board members. Victor Reyes was notably absent from the front table. I spotted him near the back, sitting alone, his face pale. Julie was dressed impeccably, navy blazer, pearl earrings, and her hair pulled back in its usual tight bun. She smiled as residents filed in, shaking hands, making small talk, projecting absolute confidence. If she had seen the article, she showed no sign of it. She was performing, and she was good at it. At 10 o'clock exactly. Julie called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I know there has been a lot of confusion in our community recently. Accusations have been made, stories have been published. I want to address these directly and transparently." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. "The truth is simple. A small group of property owners, led by Mr. Daniel Foster, has decided to challenge our community's authority rather than pay their fair share. They have hired lawyers. They have contacted journalists. They have filed complaints designed to create chaos and undermine the stability we have all worked so hard to build." She shook her head sadly. "I am not here to attack anyone. I am here to defend this community. And I am asking all of you to stand with me." A hand went up in the 3rd row. Margaret Dawson, a longtime resident I recognized from previous meetings. "Mrs. Rogers, the article mentions a recording from the 2015 board meeting, where you discussed not notifying legacy parcel owners. Is that recording real? The room went silent. Julie's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. That recording, if it exists, has been taken completely out of context. Board discussions are often informal. Comments are made in the heat of debate that do not reflect final decisions. I can assure you that every action this board has taken was reviewed by our legal counsel and executed in full compliance with our governing documents. I stood. Mrs. Rogers, may I respond? Julie hesitated. Robert Marsh leaned over and whispered something. She nodded slowly. Mr. Foster, this is not typically a forum for debate, but in the interest of transparency, I will allow a brief statement. I walked to the front of the room, carrying a folder of documents. I did not rush. I did not raise my voice. I let the silence build. My name is Daniel Foster. I purchased my cabin 7 months ago, 30 days after closing. Mrs. Rogers appeared at my door demanding $38,000 in HOA fees accumulated by the previous owner. She told me I had 60 days to pay or she would foreclose on my home. I held up the first document. This is the original plat map for Pinecrest Estates, recorded in 1995. It clearly shows Legacy Parcel 7, my property, excluded from the subdivision. The surveyor's note says, not part of subdivision, pre-existing structure. I held up the second document. This is a certified letter from the county recorder confirming that no HOA covenants, no amendments, and no liens were ever legally recorded against my property, as far as the county is concerned. Pinecrest Estates HOA has no jurisdiction over my cabin. I held up the third document. These are the board meeting minutes from March 2015, when the boundary amendment was passed. The minutes show that only 12 people attended, all board members or their spouses. No legacy parcel owners were notified, no consent was obtained, no public hearing was held. Julie interrupted. Those minutes are internal documents that have been misrepresented. I have not finished. My voice was calm. The room was absolutely still. I also have this. I pulled out my phone and pressed play. Julie's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. They will not be notified. If we tell them what we are doing, they will object. We proceed quietly. By the time they realize what has happened, they will be too deep in fees and interest to fight back. I let it play for another 30 seconds. Robert Marsh's voice. Whether it complies with state law is a question we hope never gets tested. Then Julie again. These are old people in old cabins. They do not have lawyers. They do not have resources. They will pay, or they will leave. Either way, we win. The room erupted. People shouted questions. Some demanded explanations. Others demanded Julie's resignation. Julie stood frozen at the front table, her composure finally cracking. Robert Marsh was furiously gathering his papers, and in the back of the room. Victor Reyes stood up. She is telling the truth. His voice cut through the noise. The room turned to look at him. The recording is real. I was at that meeting. I asked if what we were doing was legal. Robert told me not to worry about it. Julie said no one would ever check. He was shaking, but he kept talking. I have emails. I have records of payments to Ridgeline through my construction company. I have documentation of the arrangement between Julie's husband and the developer. He looked directly at Julie. I am not going to prison for you. I already told the district attorney everything. Julie's face went white. For the first time since I had met her, she had no script to follow. Victor, you do not know what you are saying. I know exactly what I am saying. Victor's voice was steady now. You told me this would never come back to us. You said the legacy owners were too old and too poor to fight. You were wrong. He sat down. The room was in chaos. Board members were arguing. Residents were demanding answers. Someone had already called the local news station. In the middle of it all, I saw a woman I did not recognize approach Julie and show her a badge. She spoke quietly, but I caught the words, "District Attorney's Office. We have some questions." Joan found me near the exit. Her expression was controlled, but her eyes were bright. "Victor's cooperation changes everything. With his testimony and documentation, this is no longer just civil fraud. This is a criminal conspiracy. The DA is going to move fast." I looked back at the room. Julie was being escorted toward a side door, her face blank, her composure shattered. The woman who had spent a decade building an empire on lies was watching it collapse in real time. Robert Marsh had already disappeared. The remaining board members sat at the front table, looking at each other, looking at the crowd, looking for someone to tell them what to do next. A resident approached me as I was leaving. An older woman I had seen at the board meeting months ago. One of the ones who had glared at me when Julie painted me as the enemy. "I signed that petition against you," she said. "I believed everything she told us. I am sorry." I told her she did not need to apologize. She had trusted someone who was supposed to lead. That was not her fault. Outside. The mountain air was cold and clean. The sun was bright over the ridgeline. I stood by my truck, watching people stream out of the clubhouse, talking in small groups, processing what they had just witnessed. Walter Castillo was interviewing someone near the entrance, his phone recording. A news van was pulling into the parking lot. This was not over. There would be hearings and depositions and legal proceedings that could take months or years. But the truth was out. The recording had been heard. Julie Rogers was no longer untouchable. And somewhere, Harold Jennings was finally getting justice. The legal system moved within 72 hours. The district attorney filed charges against Julie Rogers' fraud, filing fraudulent instruments, and conspiracy to deprive property rights. Robert Marsh was named as an unindicted co-conspirator pending state bar review. Victor Reyes, cooperating fully, had provided emails, financial records, and testimony about the arrangement between the HOA, his company, and Ridgeline. His charges were reduced in exchange. These were initial filings, not convictions. The proceedings would take months, possibly years. But the machinery had started. Joan filed an emergency motion to void the liens against legacy parcel properties. The judge granted it within a week. Earl Taylor filed suit to recover the $14,000 he had paid. Betty Morrison's daughter filed for wrongful foreclosure. A class action was forming. The total potential liability approached $2 million, though collecting would be another matter entirely. The HOA's insurance company was already investigating whether intentional fraud voided coverage. The HOA itself was hemorrhaging. Board members resigned daily, suddenly aware of personal liability for decisions they had rubber-stamped without reading. Independent counsel was hired to review a decade of actions. Documents Victor provided showed where the money had actually gone, hundreds of thousands in consulting fees to a company owned by Julie's husband, inflated invoices to Victor's firm. The community that Julie had claimed to protect had been subsidizing her personal enrichment. How much could be recovered was unclear. Whether the HOA would survive as an organization was equally uncertain. The county commission scheduled a public hearing for late October to review HOA oversight procedures. The chamber was designed for 50 people. Over 100 came. They lined the walls and filled the hallway. I recognized faces from Pinecrest. Several had signed the petition against me. They did not glare this time. I testified first. I described purchasing my cabin, receiving the demand letter, discovering the fraud, and building the case. I did not attack Julie by name more than necessary. I focused on system failures, no county verification before HOAs could file liens, no mandatory notification when boundary amendments affected non-members, no accessible process for property owners to challenge fraudulent claims before losing their homes. I recommended 3 reforms county certification of HOA jurisdiction before lien filing. independent legal review for boundary amendments affecting non-members, and a county ombudsman for HOA disputes. Whether the commission would act on any of them remained to be seen. Earl testified next. His voice was quieter than mine. I am 71 years old. I fought in Vietnam. I worked in the mines for 30 years. I thought I knew what courage was. But I let a woman in a blazer take $14,000 from me because I was too scared to say no. He paused. I am not scared anymore. Betty Morrison's daughter, Sarah, read her mother's statement. Betty was too ill to travel. The statement described losing the cabin her husband had built, the cabin where she had raised her children. It described Julie arriving with papers and promises. It described signing away her home for half its value because she did not know she had another choice. My mother trusted that people in authority would tell her the truth, Sarah said. They did not. The commission heard from 4 other witnesses. By the end, the pattern was documented. Whether it would lead to meaningful reform was a different question. Commissions held hearings all the time. Recommendations gathered dust. I had done what I could. The rest was not up to me. Ridgeline Development issued a statement 2 days later denying knowledge of improper methods. They blamed Julie for acting without authorization. Public records requests had already revealed emails between Julie's husband and Ridgeline executives discussing acquisition timelines. But the company's lawyers would argue those proved nothing conclusive. Their stock dropped. Their CEO stepped down. A shareholder lawsuit was filed. None of this meant the company was finished. Corporations survived worse. They restructured, rebranded, waited for attention to shift elsewhere. Ridgeline would likely do the same. The community response was harder to categorize. I received letters from Pinecrest residents. Some apologized. Some expressed gratitude. Some simply said they had not known, should have asked questions, were sorry for what I had been through. One came from Margaret Dawson, the woman who had asked Julie about the recording at the meeting. I served on the board for 3 years before Julie pushed me out for asking too many questions. I knew something was wrong, but I did not pursue it. You did. Thank you. I read it twice. I was not sure I deserved thanks for doing what anyone should have done. Joan called me that evening. The new HOA board wants to meet with you. They are asking if you would consider joining as a member at large. They want someone who will ask hard questions. I did not respond immediately. You do not have to answer now, she said, but think about what it would mean. You would be inside the system you just exposed, working with people who looked the other way for years, trying to fix something that may not want to be fixed. I thought about it after we hung up. The offer was not triumphant. It was complicated. The people asking me to join had not stood with Harold Jennings. They had not asked questions when Julie was in charge. Some of them had signed the petition against me. Now they wanted me to help clean up the mess they had allowed to happen. There was no guarantee they would listen. No guarantee the reforms I recommended would be implemented. No guarantee I would not spend years fighting the same battles Harold had fought, alone, against people who smiled at meetings and ignored me afterward. But someone had to do it. Harold had fought alone for 9 years and died before anything changed. Earl had paid because no one stood with him. Betty had lost her home because the system had no one watching. If I walked away now, the same thing would happen again. Maybe not in Pinecrest, maybe not immediately, but somewhere, to someone. Because the people who could have stopped it decided it was not their problem. I did not know if I was the right person. I did not know if I had the patience or the temperament for committee meetings and procedural votes and slow, grinding institutional work. I only knew that the alternative was letting Julie Rogers' successors, whoever they were, operate in the same darkness she had used. I told Joan I would think about it overnight. She said that was wise. Neither of us pretended it was a simple decision. Outside my window, the mountains were dark against the evening sky. The same view Harold Jennings had seen every night for 60 years. The same view I had bought this cabin to see, somewhere in the valley below, The Pinecrest clubhouse lights were on. People were meeting, talking, trying to figure out what came next. I was one of those people now, whether I wanted to be or not. The question was, what I would do about it. 6 months later. The consequences had settled into their final shape. Julie Rogers pleaded no contest to fraud charges, 3 years probation, $75,000 in fines, permanently barred from serving on any HOA or nonprofit board. Her real estate license was revoked. It was less than she deserved, but it was more than Harold Jennings had ever seen. Robert Marsh was disbarred for 2 years. Victor Reyes received probation and a suspended construction license. The system had worked. Imperfectly. Slowly. But it had worked. The class action settled for $1.2 million, divided among the legacy parcel owners who had been defrauded. Earl Taylor received his $14,000 back, plus damages. Betty Morrison's daughter accepted a settlement that included a formal apology from the reconstituted HOA board. Betty herself had passed away 3 months earlier, but Sarah said her mother had known, in the end, that she had been vindicated. That was worth something. I accepted the board position, not because I wanted it, not because I trusted the people who had offered it, but because Harold Jennings had spent 9 years fighting alone. I did not want the next person to face the same isolation. The work was tedious. Committee meetings, procedural votes, arguments about landscaping budgets and speed bumps. But every meeting, I asked questions. Every vote. I read the documents. Every decision. I made sure someone was watching. It was not heroic. It was maintenance. That was the point. The County Commission adopted 2 of my 3 recommendations. Liens now require county certification of HOA jurisdiction. Boundary amendments affecting non-members required an independent legal review. The Ombudsman Office was still under consideration. Progress, not victory. I had learned to accept the difference. The email arrived on a Tuesday evening in April. The sender was a woman named Sophia Bailey from New Mexico. Mr. Foster, my name is Sophia. I live on a ranch my grandfather built in 1948. Last month, a homeowners association I had never heard of sent me a letter demanding $52,000 in unpaid fees. They say my property is part of their jurisdiction. My deed says otherwise. I do not have money for lawyers. I do not know what to do. Someone sent me the article about what happened in Colorado. They said you might understand. I read the email twice. Then I started typing. Sophia, I understand exactly what you are going through. Here is what you need to do first. Request a certified copy of your deed from your county recorder. Request the recorded plat map showing the HOA boundaries. Request the recorded covenants. Compare them. If your property is not included in those documents, the HOA has no legal authority over you. Do not pay anything until you have verified their claims, and do not fight alone. I am attaching contact information for attorneys who handle these cases. If you need help, reach out. I will answer. Harold Jennings fought alone for 9 years. He left his evidence for the next person. I used it. Now, I was leaving something for the person after that. That was how you beat a system, not by destroying it, by making sure no one had to face it alone.